Well, hello and welcome to Waterford United, and I'm really pleased to be here today with First Selectman candidate Pete Davis and with Board of Selectmen candidate Glenn Patterson.
Morning.
And these two men are bringing forward for our town this important central concept of Waterford United. And today I thought we would talk about one of the central responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen, and in large measure specifically the First Selectman, and that is overseeing and coordinating and bringing forward the town of Waterford budget process. Now, I guess you would say regrettably or life experience-wise, I've had a lot of experience with this, going back to when Peter Davis's father, Herb Davis, was first selectman, and I was a young employee in the town of Waterford's recreation department. And the recreation director at the time had me prepare some budget documents, and then I followed that through the whole process, bringing that forward all the way to the final action of the RTM in May. And I learned a lot, but more specifically, I learned the central role the First Selectman has in overseeing that this is done in a coordinated way, because we have 37 or so departments and agencies in the town of Waterford. So it is a large government with a wide range of responsibilities, and the First Selectman really is, to use former President Harry Truman's word, is definitely where the buck stops on getting that in a coordinated way forward. So having learned that, Pete, I thought we'd talk a little bit about the process, and you and I can maybe exchange a little bit about how it works, and then
Sure.
I'd like to hear from you about how it best works.
Sure. This is a timely topic. We're essentially in the middle of preparing the budgets for the fiscal year 2015 to 2016. It's important to point out, just for clarification, municipal budgets don't run on a calendar year, January through December. Municipal budgets actually run from July 1st through June 30th of the following year. So
Pete, quickly, that changed while your father was first selectman.
It did.
Joe Berdalis was moderator of the RTM. I remember him explaining to all of us working in the government, your father and Mr. Berdalis, explaining when we went from what we called a baby budget, because we were on a calendar budget, to the
Sure.
July 1st to June 30th. Yeah. So that's where we are now, in a uniform fiscal year.
Yeah. So just a snapshot of where we are with the current budget preparations. The proposed budget at this point is $88,313,593. What that equates to is a 26.4 mill rate, which is up about 1.6 mils. And the thing that's really critical for people to know, and what really everybody's interested in, is that will equate to about a 6.4% tax increase. Mm-hmm. Now, it's important to note that we are currently, this is a tentative budget. It hasn't been through the RTM yet. So quickly on process and just generally, sometime in the fall, usually late through the fall, department heads are preparing their budgets for the next fiscal year. After the department heads prepare their budgets, it goes to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen actually reviews that budget. They're the first to go around, and your point is a good one, Paul. Probably the most important thing the Board of Selectmen is responsible for is the preparation and administration of that budget during the year. The departments in town, we have great employees, we have great department heads, so the operational budgets within departments and the day-to-day operation of the town really falls to those department heads. Obviously, the First Selectman is responsible, as you said. The buck stops there. But honestly, I think probably the thing that's most important is the preparation and administration of that budget through the year.
Yes, when you're bringing those 37 budgets together before they go forward, the First Selectman has the first true overview, eagle-eye picture of what this means and how it will affect services and how it will impact taxpayers, as you just described.
Yeah. So after the Board of Selectmen review the budget submitted by the department heads, they actually approve a tentative budget. From there, it's passed to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance does their budget review. Again, the budget is still tentative. The Board of Finance actually just completed their budget review a week or so ago. And from there, the budget is passed on to the RTM and they have the final authority of approval on the budget. So that's generally the way the process works. The final budget will determine what the mill rate is, and as a result of that, what your taxes will be the following fiscal year. So again,
It
general.
shows how important it is. As you described, the department heads begin working on this in the fall, and the RTM's final action isn't until May
Right.
to begin of that fiscal year. So it's a half a year of the government's activity and concentration. So it is important, very important.
It's a lot of work.
Yes,
It really is.
yes.
One of the things Glenn and I would like to do today is just share some of our observations about the budget process this year and some of the things we've observed that have caused concern and actually caused us to go back into the record and take a look at some other meeting agendas and minutes
I think it would be
related
helpful.
to the budget.
I think it would be very helpful for us to hear some specific examples. I know you and Glenn have been studying this, so that would be very helpful.
Yeah. I think probably one of the larger issues, and Glenn is going to go through it for us, is the post-benefits issue. There was an article in the newspaper recently. The town is creating a trust fund, for lack of a better term,
Yes.
to address these post-benefit issues going forward. So I think we'll turn it over to Glenn.
You
We'll
want
let
to start
Glenn
with that?
explain.
Start with
Let's
that? Sure.
start with
Yeah,
that, sure.
Okay, because you know these. I read that article with interest because I know that all current employees, former employees, and all people who care about stability in government read something like that and want to make sure the town's being good stewards of its responsibilities. So I'd like to hear about this. And by the way, I read in that it had the Retirement Commission has the good service of Bill Sheehan involved. So I think as one taxpayer, I'm grateful because I know how diligent he is on these kinds of questions.
Right. I'll talk a little bit about what these post-employment benefits are, and then and Bill had a lot to do with doing the right thing and moving forward with an initiative to set up a fund to address these liabilities going forward. So,
Excellent, excellent.
So first of all, we talk about OPEB. That's the acronym, and we're in a world of acronyms now, and that happens to be one.
Government's got a lot.
Yeah, government's got a lot of acronyms.
all over the place.
Probably got the championship in that
So
area.
OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Okay, so they're similar to a pension in that they're paid to retirees. Obviously, after they retire, it's a post-employment benefit. What they typically are, and then I think in the case of the town, we're paying retirees medical premiums. Before age 65, it's a payment of the full premium up to age 65, and then after age 65, it's a partial payment
Because
to that employee.
Medicare begins.
Correct, because
Correct.
Medicare kicks in. Yep.
Yes, understood.
So, and most towns, I mean, I think it's a general understanding that when you have a pension, you have what they call the pension fund. You have a trust fund that the municipality or the agency uses to help pay those pensions. You set up a fund to do that. Waterford has no fund to do this, and I think as far as other municipalities go, it's a little bit all over the place. Some have started to set them up, some have not.
These are all for these other post-employment
correct.
benefits?
Correct.
Yeah.
This for the OPEB.
Right,
And
gotcha.
so basically, what a lot of municipalities do now is you pay as you go. You set up a budget line item to pay these benefits going forward every year. It's predictable. You know how many retirees you have. OPEB is a little different than a pension in one regard, though. Pensions are shown on the town's financial statements as a financial liability that the town has to meet. Up until this year, or I think it's next year actually, these OPEB numbers were not part of that statement. They're always part of the notes. They're in the fine print, so to speak.
Understood. I've read those diligently,
right.
so I understand.
So-
I'm not sure many of,
Yeah.
of our viewers
Yeah.
do. So it's
And I
good
don't
to
blame
hear.
them for not reading them. It
Can get a little dry.
yeah, very.
Life is short, and that's why.
So the accounting standards next year are going to require that liability be shown in the financial statement. And OPEB is different than pensions, and this is kind of an observation. It's hard to predict what that liability is because, unlike a pension, where you're 99% sure a person's going to exercise their post-retirement benefit and take that pension, people may or may not use OPEB. They may have other means of getting their insurance. Their spouse may
or
have.
something. Sure.
Exactly.
Understood. I
So,
mean, I think a lot of our viewers
Right.
have that family experience.
Right. Exactly. So that's kind of what OPEB is. And now I'll try to shift into why this liability matters to the town. While folks may or may not use it, the accounting standards that they use to predict this liability count everyone who may potentially use it, which generates a bigger liability number than really will likely be the case. It's kind of a worst case scenario approach to the accounting.
And the town's obligated to follow these specific accounting procedures.
It is.
Yeah, unlike companies, for instance.
Right.
Yeah, understood.
That's true.
Okay.
So, and I want to emphasize to a question you asked me earlier, the fact that we have this liability is in no way, shape, or form indicative of the town's ability to pay the benefits to the folks who are entitled to them now. We've had, no issues in town funding the folks who are retired and want to collect that benefit. So while we've had no problem paying as we go to these folks, the town's been accruing an accounting liability of over $1 million a year.
I follow.
And that's been going on for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Significant
So it's a
number.
significant number,
Yes.
which, will raise eyebrows, I think, when people see it on the financial statement.
Sure.
So
And you have to get at that elephant.
you do.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
address
Yeah.
it. And
Okay.
that. So again, while we will likely not end up owing that, having to pay out that full liability as time goes by into the future, we've done nothing over the last 10 years to plan for that liability. We've paid as we went. We've taken care of the folks like we should, but we've done nothing to plan for that liability going forward. Until this year, when again the Retirement Commission brought forth, we really need to start funding this trust fund so that we can put the fund out there, earn some income on that fund, and use that to help us pay this liability. So the biggest impact, I think, to the town, other than accruing the liability, is the appearance of this liability on the financial statements now could potentially impact how the bond issuers view the town as a borrowing risk.
Yes.
It could impact the interest rate. It could impact what it costs the town to borrow money. And had we even done, I think, even some minimum preparation to prepare for this liability, we would have shown the borrowers, the lenders rather, that we're doing our due diligence to bring this liability to manage it, to manage it. So.
After the financial collapse in 2008, lenders have to be, legally actually, they're under great obligations from various federal legislation to be very, very careful about how they're setting bond ratings. So
You're correct. Well, the underwriting criteria shifted dramatically
it sure
after
did.
the collapse.
And so this is important because Waterford's not in the age that we were in, when Millstone was first going online, where we could pay as we go even for capital projects. Now,
Good point. That's an excellent point.
we have to plan bonding
Right.
as a big part of our budgeting responsibility.
Absolutely.
So I'd say this comes across as it's I think an example of where we could have planned, we didn't, and now in the future it could cost us money. And we didn't need to. We didn't need to be in this position.
Yeah, we didn't need to be, financially, we didn't need to be in this position. And also as good fiscal management and for setting that bond rating. There's no reason to put ourselves at any jeopardy at all for not having the best bond rating we can have. When I was first selectman, the first thing I encountered the first bond review that the town had had in many, many decades because they were beginning the school construction projects then. And I learned a lot about how careful it is to not only have the ability, but to be able to demonstrate that the ability is sound and well planned, which gets back, I think, to the responsibility of the first selectman for having that one broad view oversight of how that should best work. And with all those steps of review, there's a lot of good people looking at the budget. But they're almost all of them are looking at it with a certain perspective of what should be accomplished.
Right.
And the first selectman has to look at that perspective of what can be accomplished without, on the other hand, causing the taxpayer such undue burden that the town can't reasonably support it. So maybe you could give some other examples of
Sure.
what you and Glenn discovered, reviewing where we are now as we plan toward a better future.
Glenn and I have promised that this is going to be an issue-based campaign.
Yes.
So as we were sitting through the Board of Finance meetings this year, and as we were talking to other elected officials throughout the town, there were certain things that popped up during the Board of Finance hearings that were of concern. Some on the operational side, the management of the budget. We expressed concerns about the Board of Education budget and the lack of capital available for them to take care of capital needs that we need to prepare for. Also, issues related to programs and policies that had actually been put in place, quite honestly, Paul, during your administration, our administration.
Yes.
Specifically this morning, what we want to talk about is the fleet management program.
Yeah, there's
So-
big cost savings if that is done right, but no cost savings at all if it's not done diligently.
No. So just to touch on the fleet management program quickly, the intention of that program was to inventory. At the time, there was no inventory of what they referred to as rolling stock in the town,
right.
which is trucks, fire trucks, dump trucks, whatever, even generators.
We had trouble finding all the titles and putting them in one place.
Yeah, it was-
As
It was a
strange
mess.
as that sound,
Yeah.
it could happen in somebody's household, and it
Sure.
certainly happened in ours.
Sure.
So we had to do that, put that in order.
So I think at the point we determined what the inventory was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the number I remember is something like $30 million in value.
Yeah, that's right. That's about right. Yes.
Approximately.
Yeah.
So the problem that
At
was
any one point in time, that's what the rolling stock
Right.
was. We had out there.
the problem that was occurring at the time was that we were experiencing a number of surprises. Something would happen with a fire truck or a dump truck or a piece of equipment, and the money wouldn't be there to replace it. So the idea of the fleet management program was to create this inventory, determine when vehicles had to be replaced, make sure the funding was there to replace those vehicles as they came up on the schedule. It was intended to be flat funded every year based on what your obligation was going to be for those vehicles a number of years out.
Right.
What that allowed for was it created a little bit of stability because you knew what the funding levels were going to be. You knew what you had coming up, what you were going to need to replace for whatever reason. And so you basically, you took a lot of those surprises off the table. Now, that's not to say that a surprise pops up once in a while, but essentially what it did was, to the extent we could, it provided stability in the budgeting process.
Absolutely. And also, some department heads can more eloquently express what they need than others. And it also provided those departments the needs they had on a more uniform basis that put the least amount of time and money into maintenance and repair.
So what we were hearing, and I'll cite a specific incident, during a meeting, there was a question from, I believe, Cheryl Lauder, who's on the Board of Finance.
Another diligent review person. I appreciate how well
she's, she's very talented in that respect.
I think the town's fortunate in that.
She digs and she asks the hard questions which are necessary.
That's right.
So what had occurred a year or so ago, or actually almost 2 years ago now, the Board of Education had taken a look at their transportation plan, and they were contracted with a group to do transportation primarily for the special education needs.
Sure.
What they determined after taking a look at it is they could actually go out and purchase vans themselves and do the transportation through the town at a cost savings. So kudos to them. They did the analysis.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that analysis
Yeah.
result either.
So
but
they went through a planning process.
Yes.
Surprise. So they ended up purchasing 4 vans. Now, they purchased the vans out of some operational money that they had, I think, at the end of the year. So the initial purchase was done by the Board of Education. What happens, though, is that those vehicles, once they're purchased, they become part of the general government responsibility under the fleet management plan.
Right.
Evidently, what happened was when those vans were purchased, they were not placed in the fleet management plan. Not only the first year, but the second year. So Cheryl Larder asked a simple question, why aren't the vans in the vehicle replacement schedule, the fleet management schedule? There's no backup on it, they don't show up. It's now our obligation, they should be in there. The response from the first selectman was, yes, we missed that one, we should have provided you that information last year. It should be in the backup material this year, it's not. The reason it's important is those 4 vans, I think the total purchase price ended up somewhere around $100,000,
Right.
give or take.
That would make sense.
I don't know what the lifespan is of those vehicles. Obviously, it's not in the vehicle fleet plan, so we
Right.
can't determine that at this point.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is when you have $100,000 worth of vehicles not in the program, once you put them in the program, you need to determine if you need to adjust that level of funding.
Mm-hmm.
You need to determine whether that's going to cause problems, and you're going to have to end up deferring the purchase of some other piece of equipment that's been in the plan, and some department head legitimately has been expecting that, okay, this year we replace that piece of equipment. So the point is that it wasn't managed properly. So that caused me to dig a little bit further. There's actually a fleet management ad hoc committee in the town.
I remember it well when we set up this whole program.
A couple of other examples. This is February of 2015, so not that long ago. The first selectman's responsible for conducting that meeting. So they're talking about replacing a refuse truck at Public Works. What they found, I'll try to make this short.
This is another high-ticket item. I mean, the viewers need to understand, we're not talking about replacing a car. We're usually talking $500,000 or $250,000.
This is a $223,000 piece of equipment.
Yeah, okay.
Now, the price for that piece of equipment to replace it is $92,000 over what was in the fleet management schedule. So essentially, you're $92,000 short in the replacement schedule.
Before you even go to any other conflicts.
Yeah. So what they found was that the original cost that was assigned to this vehicle when it was purchased, again, when it was purchased and they placed it into the fleet management plan, it was $30,000 or $50,000 less than what the purchase price was.
At the time.
At the time.
See, and we had built into the overall plan schedule, as I recall it, because I spent a lot of time on this with due diligence. We had built in an inflation schedule, knowing that the experience is that capital equipment always goes up in cost, even in bad times.
Yep.
It may be some years 1 or 2%, and other years 7%, but it goes up, and you can calculate that on an actuarial basis.
Sure.
Oh, I guess part of the point there being, though, that if you start off with the wrong number, you can do those inflation calculations.
So they get you in bad trouble real quickly.
And you get a bad number in the end, and here we are.
Over 10 or 12 years, you're in difficult. Yeah.
So, to Glenn's point, it's a good example of how things, if you don't start out with the correct number, how things can go wrong down the line. A little bit further in the minutes, there's a conversation. Mr. Dembeck actually asked if there was some other piece of equipment in the Public Works budget that they could defer the purchase to make up the difference in price for the refuse truck. So Ms. Zawicki, who's the Public Works Director, said, well, yeah, we can defer the Bombardier sidewalk snowplow for a year, and we can take money from that, and we'll just wait and do the purchase on the Bombardier the following year. But then she does note that, oh, by the way, there's not enough money in the fleet program now to replace the Bombardier.
Underplanned?
Underplanned. So again, an issue of management.
Very distressing.
And the first selectman is responsible for managing that program.
It goes back to my point that the first selectman's eyes are so important on this, and his nudging. You know, he doesn't have to know everything about every kind of capital equipment, but he's got to keep asking that question every week with every department. Oh, I'm sorry, but it's true.
And it's not a new occurrence. Evidently, this has been going on with other issues.
Yes,
so you know, you read a little further into the minutes, and they start talking about replacing a couple of generators at Utility Commission.
Mm-hmm.
So it's $60 some odd $1,000 item, I think. So they actually make the motion to fund the 2 replacement generators, and then Mr. Bartelli, who's actually an employee of the Utility Commission, and I want to give him credit for speaking up on this issue. Mr. Bartelli actually tells the Fleet Management Ad Hoc Committee that he doesn't know why this item is on the agenda, because he's determined that those 2 generators don't exist, and he has no idea how those
Ever
were
got
even
on
in the
there?
plan.
Yeah.
They never existed.
Yeah.
So what they end up doing is they withdraw the motion, obviously because you're not going to replace something you never had.
And you don't need.
And don't
Apparently
need,
don't need, right.
Then they go on to discuss replacing a generator that they do have, but the bid is 2 years old, so the original bid is about $10,000 under what they need to replace it.
Cost, yes.
So again, the point being is that the program and the plan was set up. If you just basically followed the bouncing ball and paid attention to it and managed it properly, you wouldn't have the issue of trying to replace vehicles and being underfunded. You also wouldn't have the issue of equipment that doesn't exist popping up in a fleet management. I don't know how that happens.
Yeah.
So again, it's a management issue.
You know, as I listen to you, I'm reminded on almost every count that how there's all good people, as you described earlier. There's 7 or 8 steps in the budget process, from the department heads, and the boards and agencies and commissions, on through the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, the public hearing, the Board of Finance final action, and of course the RTM. Many knowledgeable and good people on all those steps. But there's really only one person in our government who has that overarching responsibility to see this and to make sure that it's being done. And, you know, if it's not a nudge, it doesn't get done, because there's always something to do. So unless somebody's saying, hey, I want to make sure this is done and done right. And so, Pete, I'm glad you gave us that example, because it brings us to the heart of, as boring as a topic sounds, whether you're home or doing your home budget or in the town hall trying to oversee the town's budget, it's the most essential thing that a leader has to provide to the voters and the taxpayers, and that is good management of, as you said, more than $80 million in appropriations that we ask the taxpayers to bear in order to have a good government to provide their services.
Yeah. I mean,
That's a big job.
I'm no different than anybody else. I write my check to pay my taxes twice a year. The expectation is that when I write that check and it goes to the town, that the town is using that money wisely, spending it what they're supposed to be spending on it, and planning appropriately.
Absolutely.
To make sure that there's less of an impact.
Absolutely. So I'm grateful for both of you, your diligence in the review and also a preview of the diligence that you can provide to town government. So with that, this has been Waterford United with First Selectman candidate Pete Davis and Board of Selectmen candidate Glenn Patterson. And I hope you've enjoyed this review. We'll be having other topics that we'll be reviewing leading up to November. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.